Good morning. Welcome to the Sunday morning video reflection here at Bethlehem Lutheran Church in New Orleans, Louisiana. You might hear some noise while I'm speaking today. That's our team of volunteers preparing today's meal for Community Table, a free, no questions asked meal that we serve every Wednesday and Sunday at noon. If you'd like to know more about Bethlehem, 132-year-old historically black church in Central City, New Orleans, you can find us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/BethlehemNola. Or if you'd like to support our ministry and our work, please visit us at blcnola.org/donate. It is hard, if not impossible, to find all the right words to say when you've been through a week like our country has been through. So today's video reflection focuses on two things. How do we act when we're put in a moment of moral crisis? And how do we address the long history of white supremacist Christianity in America? And so, with that said, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. In 1977, the Salvadoran government assassinated a Jesuit priest named Father Rutilio Grande, along with a 16-year-old boy and an elderly man who were in the car with him. They were driving in a car on the road between Aguilares and El Paisnao, two towns to the north of San Salvador. They were ambushed by the government and shot and killed. This moment of terrorism and murder became a rallying cry for the Salvadoran people throughout the Civil War against the American-backed government. And I've been thinking about this moment for a couple days now, not because it is exactly like our own crisis of violence and bloodshed, but because in that moment of crisis, and in our moment of crisis, a lot of things have become clear. In that moment of crisis, it became clear that the government had no boundaries in their will to power. The murder of a priest in an extraordinarily Catholic country was a profane act that shocked people everywhere. Just like how it became clear in our crisis that the white supremacists in D.C. were willing to murder a police officer, the kind of person they've always held to be sacred. A lie that exposed their pro-police propaganda as being nothing more than anti-blackness hate. They saw police as a useful proxy in the war against black people in America, but could not imagine, could not fathom a moment when the police would come for them. It became clear in that crisis that there was no longer a way to stay neutral in the conflict between the government and the guerrilla forces that were fighting it. Just as it became clear in our crisis that there is no moral case to support a president who incited a riot and who supported white supremacists who were eager to take over the Capitol. And let me be clear, the way I see it is not that no government should be opposed or overthrown. There may well be cases in which dialogue is not the answer. But there's been a lot of comparison between the terrorist attack on the Capitol, one which included pipe bombs and guns, and the Black Lives Matter marches this summer. The terrorists this week were fighting for a would-be dictator and a well-known liar and coward who wanted to unjustly overturn the will of a national election that put him out of power. Black Lives Matter marches this summer were demanding equal treatment under the law, based on a continuation of a fight against centuries of white supremacy in America. The moral calculus of these movements could not be more different. It became clear in that moment of crisis that crisis can spur people into change, and sometimes perhaps into greatness. Oscar Romero, a close friend of Father Rutilio Grande, had been recently appointed the Archbishop of El Salvador, appointed because he was known to be conservative, quiet, and bookish. After Rutilio Grande was murdered, Archbishop Romero traveled that evening to the countryside to mourn his friend, to say a late-night mass, and then to stay up all night with the priests and townspeople who were gathered to grieve with them and to listen to them. That crisis, that night, changed his heart and the course of his life. He became one of the most formidable opponents of the Salvadoran government and its atrocities, using his moral authority to denounce the violence and ultimately asking the country's soldiers not to obey unjust orders that would have them murder their fellow Salvadorans. In turn, Archbishop Romero was murdered and martyred by a government death squad while saying Mass in a small hospital chapel. That became another bloody event that was a rallying cry and an inspiration for the people of El Salvador. I'm left wondering a lot of things today. I'm wondering how long it will take to get a clear picture of the terrorist attack on Wednesday, a picture that I suspect will get worse and more rotten as time goes on. I'm left wondering and worried what form the next outbreak of violence from our nation's white supremacists will take. I'm left wondering who this crisis will change. Who in their grief and anger will be transformed and transfigured? Will it be us? And I'm left wondering, sick to my stomach, about the images of Jesus and signs about Jesus that accompanied the terrorists into the Capitol. You see, Jesus enters our story this week not as an inspiration, but as a white idol. Over and over on the CNN coverage, we saw a sign that said, Jesus saves, being waved from the Capitol steps, the seat of the insurrection. There are pictures of people bowing before a portrait of Jesus with a Make America Great Again hat on. Somehow, for hundreds of years, white Americans have used Jesus as the primary rationale for white supremacy. Jesus sponsored the colonization of the Americas. Jesus supported the slave trade in the Confederacy. Jesus was honored by the Klan in their ceremonies and rituals. Jesus has been at the rotten core of white supremacy since America's founding as a white supremacist republic. And what that means is that the toughest question we need to be asking ourselves today is not really about the terrorists at the Capitol, but a question that is much simpler and much harder to answer. Why Jesus at all? Because unless we really know that answer, unless we really know why we need Jesus and why Jesus matters, and unless we know that answer in a way that accounts for all of the evil in which Jesus has been used, we're lying to ourselves, our families, our congregations, and especially to the Black and Native people of America. I think, as I've reflected on this, that as American Christians, we're guilty of letting some theoretical good outweigh a whole lot of concrete bad. Let me say that a different way. For hundreds of years, Americans have been valuing the potential of our white churches to do good much more than we valued the black lives they've enslaved, impoverished, and destroyed. In his book on Archbishop Romero, liberation theologian John Sobrino writes that what Romero realized was that he could not just claim that he was Christian and abandon the history taking place around him. That he could not take refuge in Christianity and not be a citizen of his time. That he could not abandon the country in its tragedy, taking refuge in some kind of Christianity. Archbishop Romero realized that he had to opt in to the country, to tell the truth, to denounce the atrocities, and to commit himself to justice. That is our only pathway forward at this point. Because the atrocities, privileges, and powers of America are marked on and by our skin and its colors, we cannot retreat into a refuge of Christianity abstracted from the bloody history and present of America. We need to opt into America, to tell the truth, to denounce the atrocities, and to commit ourselves to justice. So to answer the question of why Jesus, I'll say this. What keeps me coming back to church are two things. One is the incredible power, beauty, and strength of the communities that I've been lucky enough to experience at All Saints Episcopal Church in Meriden, Connecticut, All People's Church in Milwaukee, and right here at Bethlehem Lutheran Church in New Orleans. These places, two predominantly black congregations and one Spanish language congregation, have taught me that there is a radically different way to follow Jesus than that was on display this week in D.C., and that which has been dominant in our country since before it was a country. These places have taught me about a Christianity rooted in liberation, history, mutual love, and justice. Each of these communities is dedicated in their own ways to fighting evil, to taking care of who they can, and of building a small flame of love in our broken world. The other thing that brings me back is that the more I read the Bible, the more convinced I am that Jesus shows up for these communities, for our community, because we are here, like Jesus, to bring good news to the poor. John Sobrino writes that the place of the church is the suffering of the poor. And that means that the place of the church, the place of Jesus, is not with the middle class and rich white supremacists who tried to derail our government for the personal gratification of a soon-to-be former president and wannabe dictator. Have you noticed that the people getting arrested and identified are CEOs and business owners, college students, politicians, police officers? The place of the church, the place of Jesus, is with the people in our neighborhood who don't have food, who are sleeping in abandoned houses, who are stigmatized because of their HIV, who have been systematically denied justice under the law, and who are getting sick with COVID over and over because our country's leadership has done almost nothing about it since the election in November. That's where Jesus is, and that's where every church should be now. This week has left us with more questions than answers. And it's foolish to pretend the hot take now is going to stick as more information and evidence comes out. But as it comes out, the attack continues to look worse and worse and more violent. I read an essay yesterday that really stuck with me. An interview with two of the black Capitol police officers who essentially describe being hung out to dry by their commanders and their colleagues. The reckoning for that riot will take a long time, but I also think we must prepare ourselves for more violence to come. So in the face of all of this, I want to return to the blueprint from John Sobrino, from Oscar Romero, that we must opt in to our life in America because we have no way of escaping how its history has formed us. That we must tell the truth, the things that we can see with clear eyes and clear analysis about the injustice of America. We need to denounce the atrocities, not just the big ones that make the national news, but all of the things that are stacked against the thriving of black people in America. And we need to recommit ourselves to justice, to a world in which reparations come before calls for healing and unity, a world in which the cry of the poor is the priority and the location of the church, and to a world in which we venerate Jesus, not as a white personal Santa Claus, but as the Jesus who flipped over the tables being used to cheat the people, who healed those who were sick without asking for pay, and who was hung on a cross by an empire who feared him so much they needed him dead. Amen.